Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's City Council meeting. It is Tuesday, October 16th, and we're certainly pleased to have everybody here in attendance tonight. First off, we want to introduce you to your City Council with our roll call.
Council members Karski.
Here.
Rolfing.
Here.
Staggers.
Present.
Aguilar. Here. Anderson Jr.
Here.
Entenmann.
Here.
Erpenbach. Here. Jameson.
Here.
Once again, all your City Council members are here, which is normally the case. They're ready to do your city's work. We're going to start tonight's meeting with an invocation, as we always do. And we're very blessed to have Pastor Kirk Flaw of the Abiding Savior Lutheran Church here to lead us in prayer. What we do is we'd ask you to stand. Pastor Kirk will give us our invocation, and then we'll also continue with our Pledge of Allegiance. Welcome, Pastor Kirk.
Yeah, thank you again for permitting us the opportunity to come. And I say this every time I do come, but I want you to know that our church family and myself pray regularly for all of you. You are a blessing to our community, and we give thanks that we can come and share tonight a word of invocation as well. I'm going to share the book of Proverbs, just one verse. And it says in Proverbs chapter 11, verse 14, where there is no guidance, the people fall, but in abundance of counselors, there is victory. And again, I view this group as counselors. I view you as men and women that are entrusted with making decisions on behalf of all of us. And therefore, all of us would need wisdom. And again, grateful to be able to pray in that regard. Heavenly Father, as we do come tonight, we give thanks for the privilege of freedom and democracy, and to be able to come and talk and share and be able to make decisions as a group. I thank you for these counselors. And Lord, there is victory in good counsel. And Lord, I pray that you would bless these men and these women as you have entrusted them with a sphere of influence. I pray that they would use this freedom and this responsibility for good. I pray, Lord, a special blessing over this meeting. I ask, God, that there would be just good discussion and good fellowship and a sense of unity and everything. And Lord, we would commit now into your care this evening. I pray, too, for the families that are represented here. I give thanks for them, and I understand the sacrifice that leaders make to serve their community, and we give thanks for that as well. Bless us now in our meeting. And again, Lord, we would give you all glory and honor and praise. For it's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, good evening, everybody, and what a great crowd. Thanks so much for being part of city government tonight. I appreciate it. I do want to start with a proclamation. And is there anybody here with a disability mentor? Great. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. Julie, would you mind just introducing yourself to the city?
Sure. My name is Julie Briggs, and I work for Business Resource Network. We are an organization that promotes the hiring of people with disabilities and then provides accommodations and resources to those businesses to help the success of employment.
Thanks again, Julie. The proclamation reads, whereas more than 1 million people with disabilities have entered the labor force since the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. Whereas, as taxpayers, consumers, and workers, people with disabilities are contributing to our society and to their own fulfillment of the American dream. Whereas, new generations of young people with disabilities are growing up in our city, in Sioux Falls, graduating from high school, going to college, and preparing to participate in the workplace. Whereas, job seekers with disabilities, regardless of their age, are striving to attain economic independence through self-sufficiency and gainful employment. Whereas, both students and job seekers with disabilities have the right to maximize their potential by making the most of their intellect, talents, and abilities in an environment free of physical, programmatic, and attitudinal barriers. Whereas, Disability Mentoring Day provides an opportunity for students and job seekers with all types of disabilities to gain insight into career options by spending part of their day in the workplace, shadowing an employee during a normal day on the job. Whereas, employers from the private, governmental, and nonprofit sectors may benefit from mentoring people with disabilities as a way of learning about the experience of disability, developing lasting relationships with disability community leaders, and recruiting new and emerging talent for meaningful internship and employment opportunities. Whereas, these efforts are made possible through a broad partnership with the American Association of People with Disabilities and a dedicated local team of organizers from businesses, nonprofit organizations, the school district, and the city. Now, therefore, I, Mike Huther, Mayor of the City of Sioux Falls, do hereby proclaim October 23rd, 2012 as Disability Mentoring Day in Sioux Falls and encourage all citizens to recognize the enormous potential of people with disabilities and to work toward their full integration into the workforce. Thank you, Julie. I also, before we start the meeting tonight, I have the esteemed pleasure to introduce to you some of the new up-and-coming community leaders of the City of Sioux Falls. We have started what's called a Community Connections program here in our city. And the intent is to take people of this ever-growing diverse community, identify potential leaders within this diverse community, and help educate them about city government, about how we work in this town and make good things happen for the people that we serve. With your permission, I'd like to have them stand. I've got Colleen Moran as well as Jane Hennestedt, who have helped lead this program. If you would just all stand here, and I do want to just recognize all of you here tonight. We have Dennis Boa, Kendra Gottsleben, Seth Sims, Dee DeMemo, Paul Flagstead, Mustafa Rashid, Bethany Buthe, Daniel Obaka, Brian Narkami, Celso Valencia, Parley Zulu, Alex Ramirez, Jordan Dalton, Nathan Bosch, Jeremy Richards, and Andre Hernandez, who have gone through a very, very intense two-day training learning all about our city government, from finance to public works to parks to the mayor's office to this city council and so much more. As I was coming in today, one of these fine people told me the following. They said that in their country, when they cross the river, what they do is they throw back the rope to help somebody else cross the river. That's exactly what these leaders are going to do. They're going to be that bridge between what they've learned here over the last couple days and the communities that they serve and the communities that they will help lead. They'll be that bridge, or they'll throw back that rope across the river. And with that in mind, I truly want to thank you. Our town is becoming more diverse, and we're embracing that diversity, and all of you and your leadership will help us do that in so many ways. So thank you on behalf of this city. We didn't pay you a dang dime to do it, but you did it with great pride and with great enthusiasm. And so again, thank you on behalf of the City of Sioux Falls. We'll continue tonight's meeting with our consent agenda. And Council, any changes or comments to tonight's consent agenda?
Move approval, Aguilar.
Second, Entenmann.
Councilor Aguilar has made a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda, seconded by Councilor Entenmann. If there are no further comments, a roll call vote, please.
Council members Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Staggers?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Entenmann?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jamison?
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. Now, we'll now move on to tonight's regular agenda. Council, any changes?
Move to approve, Erpenbach.
Second, Entenmann.
Councilor Erpenbach's made a motion to approve tonight's regular agenda, seconded by Councilor Entenmann. If there are no further discussion items, a roll call vote, please.
Okay. Council members Karski,
Yes.
Rolfing.
Yes.
Staggers.
Yes.
Aguilar.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Entenmann.
Yes.
Erpenbach.
Yes.
Jamison.
Yes.
Thank you. Then it's passed 8-0 as well. Again, welcome to tonight's meeting. A great crowd, and I hope that the camera can pan across the crowd tonight. This is government at its finest when the people are here. This is also an opportunity for you to engage the council. If any of you want to come up and speak to the council on any topic, you're more than welcome to do so. All we'd ask is that you just state your name, please, and then if you could limit your comments to 5 minutes or less, the council would certainly appreciate that. So again, welcome.
Hello, I'm Roger Algersma. I'm going to speak on the planning of the budget, and I've seen in the paper that a few of the council people want to be more involved in that. And so I'm going to look both at past problems and an idea for the future to do one particular project better instead of just complaining about when in hindsight, things I didn't like. Basically, the mayor is more into the day-to-day running of the city, more an executive that gets it done right, and the council's more into long-term planning, and as one of their big things is to approve the budget, and so to be more involved in it makes some sense. One problem I've seen in the past, when the idea of how are we going to finance the event center came up, you were standing here and says we're going to take growth in city revenue, which comes from new tax base, and use that to pay the event center. And Greg mentioned that that new tax base needs a new fire station, and you're taking the money from this fire station. And your answer was, well, we'll deal with that when we get there, which doesn't look like long-range planning. I think, I mean, it got passed as if the city can afford this easy with no tax increase and not any big cuts and everything's so good we can just do this. Later on we hear the story that the city budget just can't go on this way, so we have to cut the employee pension fund by $104 million when the event center costs $115 million. So it starts to look like we're not using fire station money anymore, and it got passed on to something else. And it looks, I mean, you've probably done a lot more thought on this than I see, just from a few little comments I hear from you, but it almost looks like a rob Peter to pay Paul until we finally find a spot for it. And some of the council have seen this for some time, and some want to start slow because maybe their talents is another area. But when everybody works together and everybody's talent is, if the council needs certain talents and the mayor needs certain talents and different people in the council have different talents, working together is worthwhile. I remember when you were running for mayor and I was riding my bike past here and you'd had a meeting here, meeting the council. You're talking to Kenny Anderson outside and you're saying, I can work with you, Kenny, and we can work together. And from Kenny's background, he probably seen this before. He says, well, I've heard that every time. They all say they can work with us and they get in and they don't. So to continue working together, everybody's talents, where it's, if we use everybody's talents instead of one deciding to do it on their own. An idea for a project in the future was the idea of an indoor swimming pool. To get this done without stealing from something else, and without spending as much money as some might imagine as possible. I thought about it a little bit, and then someone that used to be on the council, Tam Baker, got in discussion with me on it. So that prodded me to think more on a project that I otherwise wasn't really on my front burner. But when they were going to build an indoor pool before, they wanted to do the same thing as now, is replace an outdoor pool. But last time I looked at the grid, I mean, this is an attempt to take old good ideas and new good ideas and not have one cover up the other and have it all work together. The old plan, I've seen there's a grid of the outdoor pools, and they're almost on a perfect grid. Somebody put some effort into planning this so every kid don't have to walk more than so far to an outdoor pool. And kids like outdoor pools, and they have by far the most time to swim in the summer when they're not in school, so we don't need an indoor pool for a neighborhood. An indoor pool would be for the whole city, of everybody that needs an indoor pool for their competition swimming. And if we keep every neighborhood having an outdoor pool, would mean keeping all the outdoor pools and add an indoor pool. The cost savings of that is an indoor pool don't have to be big enough for a whole neighborhood. It can just be big enough for the people doing the competition. And so it might even be cheaper to have a smaller indoor one and keep the outdoor ones all outdoor. And to not make a big jump in the budget, if you just postpone replacing the outdoor ones and stick the indoor one in between, it might not even take very much more in a budget for swimming money will stay swimming money. And I don't know exactly how much smaller an indoor pool needs to be if it's just for the competition and not for a whole neighborhood. The number difference on that might make more difference than my little chat. But just an idea of a way for everybody to work together, keep the good old ideas, keep the new progressive thoughts, and to try to get something done good.
Thank you, Roger. Appreciate it. Would anybody else like to speak to the council tonight? Well, very good. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. We'll now move on to item number 12.
All right. Item number 12 is a new 2012-13 retail malt beverage license for Asia LLC, Asia Sushi Bar and Chinese Bistro, 108 South Minnesota Avenue, full-service restaurant, conditional use permit not required. Item 13 is a new 2012 retail wine license for Asia LLC, Asia Sushi Bar and Chinese Bistro, 108 South Minnesota Avenue, full-service restaurant, CUP not required. Item 14, new 2012-13 retail malt beverage license for P-Jack's LLC, Pepper Jack's Grill, 2009 West 41st Street, Suites 1 and 2, with a conditional use permit being approved on September 5, 2012, pending final inspections per Health and Building Services. 15 is a new 2012-13 retail malt beverage license for Golf Addiction LLC, Golf Addiction, 1220 West 41st Street, including video lottery terminals, with a conditional use permit being approved on September 5, 2012. Item 15 was withdrawn by the applicant. Item 16 is a new 2013 retail wine license for Golf Addiction LLC, Golf Addiction, 1220 West 41st Street, with a conditional use permit being approved on September 5, 2012. This item was withdrawn by the applicant. 17 is a new 2012-2013 packaged malt beverage license for Dolgen Midwest LLC, Dollar General Store, 10862, to be operated at 7214 West 41st Street. Item 18, new 2012-13 packaged malt beverage license for Dolgen Midwest LLC, Dollar General Store, 11018, to be operated at 316 South Kiwanis Avenue. Item 19, transfer of a 2012-13 retail malt beverage license from NJM LLC, K's Casino, 1508 West 41st Street, to MG Oil Company, Happy Jack, Sioux Falls 2, 1508 West 41st Street. And item 20 is transfer of a 2012-13 retail malt beverage license from D&K Enterprises LLC, JJ's Billiards, 309 South Elmwood Avenue, to J&G Enterprises, JJ's Billiards, 309 South Elmwood Avenue, with a conditional use permit being approved on December 1, 2010.
Lori, great job. Jamie, welcome.
Good evening. Jamie Palmer, licensing specialist. I'm here tonight if you have any questions on these items.
Council, any questions on any of these items? Any comments?
Move approval, Aguilar.
Thank you, Councilor.
Second, Rolfing.
There's been a motion by Councilor Aguilar to approve these items, seconded by Councilor Rolfing. If there is no further discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Council members Karski,
Yes.
Rolfing,
Yes.
Staggers,
Yes.
Aguilar,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Entenmann,
Yes.
Erpenbach,
Yes.
Jamison.
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. Item 21.
Item 21 is second reading, an ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, amending the revised ordinances of the city to define and prohibit certain forms of solicitation.
Good evening, Doug Barthel, Police Chief. This is the second reading of the ordinance that we've spoken of previously. Basically, in a nutshell, the three major changes to the panhandling or begging ordinance would prohibit soliciting in an aggressive manner, would also prohibit soliciting on private property, and also from soliciting from traffic. basically, none of those are prohibited now under the current ordinance. And I might also add, there was a question that was brought up the last time about the number of cases that we've had or issues that we've had with public begging or panhandling. So far, for the first 3 quarters of this year, we're over 165 incidents that we've responded to or had to deal with. And in previous years, 2011 we had 190, 2010 180. So we're on track to be over 200 this year, so it's definitely a trend that's going up. So be happy to answer any questions.
Chief, thank you. Folks, this is a second reading, so you actually have the opportunity to engage the council on this. Would anybody like to speak on this item in the audience? Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Tracy Sabo.
Thanks, Tracy.
You're welcome. I guess I don't like this ordinance. There's a few reasons for that. Primarily is that it seems to me like it seems to be a bit of a freedom of speech issue. You know, if somebody wants to stand on a public corner and hold a sign that says "I need food" or whatever, that's their business. They should have a right to show whatever signs or verbiage they want to. If somebody tosses them money out of a car window when there's a stop sign, I guess I don't see what the big deal is. You know, obviously you don't want to be aggressively getting in the way of traffic, but the issue here is it seems to me like some people in the city, they want to control these people and they want to put them under the thumb of some approved private charity that the city's approved. And my experience with homeless people is that not all of them want to be controlled. Not all of them want to be put in that kind of environment. Some of them actually do better off in a more, freelance kind of environment. So I don't know that, you say that this is to help the homeless and the poor if they're truly needy. I'm not faulting your resolve for your reasons for doing this, but I'm not sure that this is the best solution. I think freedom for more people is really a better answer. But the other reason that I'm opposed to this is that's just dumb. The police chief was here last week, and Jameson was asking him questions about if you would, actually try to, arrest these people or cite these people. And the chief actually mentioned that a poor person isn't going to have $90 for the misdemeanor. They don't just want to lock him in jail. So it's almost like he's begging the council to pass a bill that he's openly saying he's not going to enforce anyway. And that just strikes me as silly. Bills that have selective enforcement are a recipe for all sorts of corruption. And I would urge the council to vote against this for both of those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Roger Algersma again. I didn't put a lot of thought in this, but since I have met some of the people that do the panhandling, I think that when the police chief said don't want aggressive panhandling is probably the thing that then you still have to draw a line on what's aggressive and what's not. I remember when they had the Salvation Army had a place you could sleep overnight if you're homeless, and the people at the grocery store across the street, their customers were people were panhandling them, and they didn't like this. And so people working with it worked at it till the next year only one person panhandled once. But it scared this 16-year-old employee. And getting it down to once in a whole year was pretty good, but they had to close the Salvation Army anyway because some prior deal of you have to have something else within a year. But they had it almost perfect. Except one guy at the meeting says, well, I'm mentally ill and you have to understand that and accept me the way I am. And I had a chat with him later but they don't want their 16-year-old getting mentally ill because of you going off on them. So, I mean, people have to have some sense of safety and still be able to help the poor. If you got a sign on the corner and somebody throws you money without either one getting each other's face, I think if there's a line drawn, you can't approach someone, but you can put a sign out and they can come to give you some. If too aggressive is defined, then people can still ask for help without going to all the controlled, approved places. And people can still help if they want to, but nobody gets scared of somebody that they may think are mentally ill or actually are mentally ill. Just a little bit of experience I've seen, so.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, councilors, mayor. I'm Stacy Teason. I'm the coordinator for the Homeless Advisory Board. And I'd just like to go on record as saying in the 23 years I've been working in social services programs, I have never been in support of an ordinance or anything that would actually do damage to our most vulnerable population. However, I've had some great discussions with Chief Bartel. I've had some great discussions with Michelle Erpenbach, and we've really thought a lot about what the best way in the community to make sure that people are being safe and that community resources are getting the dollars that they need, and those people that are our most vulnerable are being taken care of in the most respectful manner. I've talked with Jason at downtown Sioux Falls to kind of get a grasp of what's going on downtown. We've really just kind of made a big effort to make sure that we're aware of what's going on, because panhandling is an ugly situation. People don't like to be accosted, and people don't like to have to ask for things, but you see people holding up signs and making requests because they are in need. The bottom line is we have resources in this community. Sioux Falls is amazing when it finds out that there's a need out there. People will step up, and they always do. But for me, I just kind of wanted to make sure that we were clear on a lot of things. And the bottom line is your dollars are better served going to an agency than someone where you don't know where those dollars are actually going to. So we talk about what's out there in the community. If someone's really in need, they're going to want to know where to go. We have these fabulous Helping Hand emergency resource guides that are available. You can get them through the County Human Services Office. They show where shelters are, where food is, where things are, and if you don't know, you call the 211, and someone there will more than likely know where an option is for you to go. But it really is about making sure that resources are being used the best in the community. We've gone through a couple of really tight years with nonprofit agencies. They've really struggled with being able to make ends meet. Where your $5 or your $20 could go to that person on the street corner, that $20 could buy a ton of food, not a ton, that's exaggerating, but it could buy a lot of food for Feeding South Dakota. You have St. Francis House out there, you have the Union Gospel Mission out there, you have the Good Shepherd Center out there. Those are all programs that serve our homeless populations. We also have Feeding South Dakota that provides food. We have fabulous programs like Faith Temple that provide food. So that just making sure that the dollars are going out there, because panhandling, it's not pretty. And it happens, I mean, this summer we saw a ton of traffic. But are people really in need, or are they trying to find an easy way to make a dollar? I am not in favor of constitutional infringement, so I'm not going down that road with this topic, but I have talked it over with the chief, and I do believe that the truthfulness to this ordinance is to make sure that we're benefiting the community. So I just wanted to make sure that that was where I'm at. And these resource guides can be found at the 211, or they can also be found at the County Human Services Office, so anybody'd like those.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wanted to speak on this item? Sir, okay, thank you, thank you. Welcome.
Alan Olson. I had a friend that was a truck driver. I don't want to mention the company, they're out of business here. He was driving a truck, and his experience was that he told me one time, he said, we had a really experience that we never had before. I said, what? You won't believe this. We want to get this guy for a meal, and he was one of the best mechanics. And they want to give him a meal. And he said, no. So the company hired an undercover agent. And they follow him in his Corvette. You know where he went to? Banquet. He went to the banquet. They couldn't believe it. He drives a Corvette, changes clothes, in the rags, went to the banquet, got meal, then went back to work. and the boss couldn't believe it. So I just want to let you know that was the 1960s and 1970s. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, councilors, any comments? Councilor Stagers.
Yes, if I could ask a question of the chief. You mentioned so far that 165 people have had encounters with the police this year over panhandling. What has happened to those 165 people, or incidents, I should say?
I don't have the arrest numbers. Very few actual arrests are made. The problem is the way the current ordinance is written, we have to basically witness it, and it's so restrictive. They have to impede their basically their flow of traffic, or they're walking. So in nearly all of these cases, it's a matter of maybe finding the person that's soliciting and advising them, if they are violating the law, or explain the law to them, meeting with whoever it is that may have reported it. Some of those are officer initiated as well, but yeah, the reality is very few arrests are made for it.
So
currently.
very few arrests of the 165.
Yes.
Now, if we do pass this ordinance, are we going to have more people encountered?
Oh, I think initially there will be, until there's an education of the law, and just to kind of reinforce what I talked about last week and was mentioned previously, our intent is not to go out on day one, this is effective, and first person that's holding up a sign, place them under arrest. I envision us approaching someone like that, educate them on the new law and the changes. Then if they choose to continue on with that activity, or we encounter them later or the next day, yeah, odds are probably pretty good they're going to get arrested. So we certainly aren't going to ignore this and not enforce it. But on the other hand, our goal isn't to go out and see how many people that we can arrest. And as Stacy talked about, we've worked together with her and plan to continue to do that as we move forward, and also have our officers share some of that very same information that you talked about, most likely carry the same cards and hand those out to the people that might be involved in this.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Councilor Ermbach? No, I'm sorry.
I was going to move approval.
Councilor?
Move approval.
Councilor Ermbach's made a motion to approve. Is there a second? Councilor James? We can still have discussion. Is there a second?
Rolfing.
Seconded by Councilor Rolfing. Councilor Jameson.
I need to get a red flag or big something.
No, that's okay. There's still plenty of time for dialogue.
The question is, if I could ask the chief or the city attorney, either way, for clarification on this. As long as you're here, Chief, I've driven by these people plenty of times, and I feel bad. I look the other way. I look down. I kind of look at them like, wow, what happened to you? What should I do? And what should other people do when they drive by and they see somebody? Should they call the non-emergency number to let you guys know? Would that be the best way? Or should we stop and give them that card that Stacy has? What do we do?
Well, if it's something that you don't like seeing, report it to the police. You can either do that through the non-emergency number. You can call 911 too. It's perfectly acceptable to use that line as well. I would advise that you not give them money, simply because it's a traffic issue. There's a safety problem there. I don't like the exchange of money or transaction while a car is stopped in traffic. There's just too much potential for things to go wrong. And personally, I wouldn't encounter them at all myself. I would rather let the police do that and go that direction. If it's something that doesn't bother you, you can ignore it and drive about your way.
Okay, and then the other clarification I was looking for is, surely if I had a business in a strip mall and I owned the land, from my front door all the way to the sidewalk, and somebody was standing in front of my business, I understand that that's private property and they're violating the law. What about downtown? If they're on the sidewalk, they're not in traffic, but they're on the sidewalk in front of a store down there, and we're sitting on a corner, I don't know. But what about the sidewalk, and what about those people downtown?
Well, and Keith Allenstein is here as well. He helped craft this. I would think that the sidewalk would basically be considered public property, although whether it's public or private, you need to have permission if it's, or I should say if it's private, you need to have permission to be soliciting from there. But and if it's on public property, you aren't going to be able to aggressively solicit, and by that, and that's clearly defined. You know, it talks about you can't repeatedly ask, you can't follow them, you can't place your hands on them, those sort of things.
All right, if I could, I just need to know, but a guy standing there on the street in front of Minerva's, he's got a sign that says, "I need your help." He's just standing there, doesn't say anything, but that's his sign. Is he in violation? Sorry.
We'll address. No, that's fine. Just the public property piece.
Keith Allenstein, City Attorney's Office. If they're in public domain, they have the right to do that under this ordinance. The only way that they would get in trouble under this ordinance would be if they're, and with the parking there, I don't know how they'd be doing it, but if they're soliciting from the traffic and trying to get vehicles to pull up, then that would be a problem.
I get that. Yep.
If they're just holding a sign as people walk by and do nothing else, that would not be a violation of this ordinance. And we have to, and those are things that we can't limit generally under the free speech issues, at least the potential issues.
All right, thank you.
Councilor Inman.
Keith, just a question, and Chief, one of you. But our citizens can be assured that, of course, a person's definition of aggressive is kind of in their own mind, depending upon what the situation is. But our citizens can be assured that if they do receive a phone call, if they do call the police are going to react, and they are going to go to the scene from a complaint that's filed like that. Is that not correct? So our citizens really are the ones that, if there's a complaint filed, they can be assured that our police are going to answer that complaint.
Right, absolutely. It doesn't matter whether or not what you think was or wasn't against the law. If you ask for the police to respond, we will. We'll investigate it, and if at the end we determine that it wasn't a violation, then there won't be any action taken. And if there was, it's up to the officer's discretion, and again, there's a lot of factors that will play into that, whether or not an actual arrest is made. So.
Great, thank you very much.
Councilor Staggers.
Yeah, I have a question for Keith. The primary concern I have about this ordinance is somebody standing at a off-ramp, and they just have a sign saying, "I will work for food." That's it. That would be illegal, or would it be legal with this ordinance?
If they're, I mean, we'd have to determine what their true intent is. If their intent is to just have an exchange of money, and that would be a problem. The soliciting is asking for money, objects, or soliciting the sale of goods or services. So technically, whether they're asking for money or asking to provide services, that would still be illegal. The reason for this is, and you can regulate certain types of speech under reasonable time, place, and manner. And the problem with this is the place. Anytime you get a conflict between, and where you're standing on an off-ramp, oftentimes, for example, the off-ramp at 26 and I-29 is where daily you'll see people there. There's no sidewalk, there's no crosswalk, there's no anything, and you have hundreds of cars per hour going through there. So yes, this would be a violation of that if they're trying to solicit services. Selling their services, whatever it is, will work for food, because you have the same conflict between pedestrians and vehicles.
But if you have "I will work for food" downtown on the sidewalk, that's okay.
Correct.
But this is also a public area too.
I'm sorry?
Where they're standing at is a public area. It's government, and there's traffic there, granted, but they just have a sign. That's all. I will work for food.
Are you talking about the off-ramp or downtown?
The off-ramp, yeah.
The off-ramp, yeah. I understand it. It is a somewhat public domain. If there's a sidewalk there, the public and private doesn't matter as far as soliciting from traffic. The problem with that, whether you're standing on a public sidewalk or anything else, the problem with that is the vehicle and pedestrian conflict that causes when you have an exchange of money or an exchange of, hey, here's my business card, here's how you can contact me. When you start impeding traffic, you start causing some concerns. The light turns green, the person behind you starts to go, they rear in the car. Next thing you know, somebody gets tangled up in a car. Those are the things. It doesn't matter what the sign you're holding says. That's the conflict we're trying to avoid through this ordinance.
Okay.
Well, Council, very good dialogue. I appreciate that. And Keith and Chief, thanks for your comments as well. With that in mind, if we could have a roll call vote, please.
If I could just maybe say why I'm going to vote the way I am on this. The reason is still I have a problem with somebody just standing and saying, I will work for food. I don't know, I guess I haven't been aware that we've been having a lot of accidents with people doing that, and so this is the primary reason why I will not vote for this.
Councilor Staggers, thank you. If we could have a roll call vote, please.
Council members Karski.
Yes.
Rolfing.
Yes.
Staggers.
No.
Aguilar.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Entenmann.
Yes.
Erpenbach.
Yes.
Jameson.
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 7-1. Item 22.
Second reading, an ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, authorizing the issuance of its wastewater system revenue bond to the South Dakota Conservancy District, authorizing the use of the proceeds thereof for capital improvements, pledging a portion of the wastewater system revenue of the city to the payment of the bond, fixing the terms of the bond, authorizing the execution and delivery of a loan agreement between the city and the South Dakota Conservancy District, and authorizing the execution and delivery of the bond to the South Dakota Conservancy District in an amount not to exceed $12,464,000.
Welcome, Trent.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Trent Luber's Office of Public Works. Tonight I have with me Mark Perry to address some of the specifics with the sewer project if you have any questions. And our bond counsel, Doug Hayek, is available to talk about process as it relates to the loan and the process associated with that. What this item is it's a debt issuance for SRF Loan 34. What it allows us to do is construct our next major sewer project associated with closing that link we've talked about after the 2010 sewer assessment. If you think about the major sewer that we've been talking about for the last 2 years, starting at around 41st Street and following the river all the way around the south end of the city, all the way up to around Falls Park and beyond in that area where the spillway is, there's been a large section of major sewer replacement. This is the last link to finish that project. What I have up on the board is the part of the project that we would like to do yet this winter. The item 28 is related to this project also. There would be an amendment to move this project forward. We'll talk about that after this item. But this would go through the Yankton Trail Park. We would like to do some winter construction work through the intersection of 57th and Western. We would coordinate that with the street construction work that happens next summer. And then it goes just beyond Farmfield Park, underneath the interstate, and comes up by the old railroad bridge behind the Johnson Estates Trailer Park. It represents about 9,000 feet of sewer. It increases the capacity. It essentially doubles the capacity in the pipe. We go from a 36 and a 42 to a 54-inch, and it really increases that structural integrity of the pipe, and it moves the pipe further away from the river, an alignment that protects the pipe from those 100-year flood events. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Trent, thank you very much. Again, folks, this is a second reading, so if there's anybody who wants to talk about this from the audience, you certainly have that opportunity. Very good. Council, turn over to you. Councilor Staggers.
Yeah, Trent, this is replacing pipe that's about a little over 30 years old. Now, with this kind of pipe, do we get any kind of guarantee from the manufacturer or anything like that?
Mark, is there a guarantee from... The pipe is, the industry considers the pipe a 100-year pipe, and certainly it has a higher resistance to those corrosive forces that come inside a sewer system. The old pipe was concrete that had a liner in it, and that had the potential, if the liner got corrupted in any way, to get corroded with those corrosive forces inside the pipe.
So do we know if we get a guarantee for a few years or?
Mark Perry with the Water Reclamation Division. With all water rec projects, we ask for a 2-year warranty period.
Okay. Thank you.
But like Trent said, this pipe is a very good pipe, and it'll last from 50 to 100 years, according to the manufacturers.
Councilor Entenmann.
Question on that warranty. Does that include labor also on that warranty? Or is that just materials only? Sorry, it's my industry that I'm in.
That's for labor and materials. Whatever, if anything goes wrong with that pipe in that 2-year period,
great.
They're coming back to fix it.
Thank you. Good. Good.
That's all right.
Yes, Councilor Rolfing.
Is the next project going through Harmon Park instead of my soccer fields?
I don't think we have anything going through Harmon Park, and we're going to have minimal disruption through the soccer fields.
Okay, I know. I'm just trying to get back at Kenny Anderson a little bit here.
Well, Council, would anybody want to make a motion to move this forward?
So move, Entenmann.
Councilor Entenmann, thank you.
Second, Anderson.
Thank you, Councilor Anderson, Jr. There's been a motion, and it has been seconded. If there is no further discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Council members Karski.
Yes.
Rolfing.
Yes.
Staggers.
Yes.
Aguilar.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Entenmann.
Yes.
Erpenbach.
Yes.
Jameson.
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. Item 23.
This is first reading, an ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, approving a First Amendment to water tank lease agreement with New Singular Wireless, PCS, LLC, a Delaware limited liability company.
This item represents typical practice for us in the Water Division. Essentially what this is it's a lease for the tower space or the top of the tanks for us to put communications equipment. In conjunction with the Planning Department and minimizing the amount of communication towers that were throughout town, they were looking at using some of those existing high spaces and leasing that space out. So what this represents is an agreement for 2 towers. It's an amendment to an existing agreement that changes the amount of space that they would use on the tower. It increases the amount of lease amount, and then there's an extension of term to the existing lease.
And Council, of course, this is the first reading, so I'm going to leave it in your hands. Councilor Anderson, Jr.
Yes, Trent, on these water towers, how many different types of communication devices can we place on a water tower? Is it just one, or?
No, there's several companies and several different types of communication equipment up there. And one of the things that we require when we work with these companies is they have to provide an engineering document that says from a structural standpoint that the tower can withstand the wind loading and those types of things that are happening, and also that they don't cause any interference for the other tenants that are up there.
Thank you.
Councilor Rolfing.
Trent, have you done any research as to how this lease compares with other leases around the country?
No, I have not. We actually have a company that represents us right now, and they negotiate to get the best price based on industry practices.
Okay.
Councilor Entenmann.
It's a good lease.
Thank you, Councilor.
We only have good leases.
Council, would anybody want to set a date of hearing and second reading for Tuesday, November 6th at 7 p.m. for item number 23?
So moved, Erpenbach.
Thank you, Councilor. And it has been seconded by Councilor Entenmann. If there is no further discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Council members Karski.
Yes.
Rolfing.
Yes.
Staggers.
Yes.
Aguilar.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Entenmann.
Yes.
Erpenbach.
Yes.
Jameson.
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. Item 24.
First reading, an ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, rezoning property at East Arrowhead Parkway and South Powder House Road from the C4 Planned Commercial District to the C2 General Commercial District, petition number 2012-0903, and amending the official zoning map of the City of Sioux Falls. Planning Commission recommends approval.
Good evening. I'm Mike Cooper, representing Planning and Building Services. Tonight we have 4 items that we'll look at first reading, and these were considered by the Planning Commission at their last regular meeting. This is an item that's being petitioned by the property owner, Thomas Hine. It consists of about 40 acres of land, and it's located on the east side of Powder House Road and on the north side of Arrowhead Parkway or Highway 42. This property is currently being used for both residential as well as an agricultural horse farm. This was zoned commercial some time back in support of looking at future development potential for this area. As you know, this is a major intersection. We have the Dolly Farm Village to the southwest, Menards to the west, and to the east was a future major commercial development that was going to be known as the Galleria. What Mr. Hine is now asking us to do is change the commercial zoning to allow more flexibility in terms of potential land uses as well as signage options. And this also kind of ties in with our future zoning ordinance amendments that we're currently working on. So the Planning Commission did look at this and is recommending approval of this change from one commercial designation to another.
Thank you, Mike. Council, questions, comments, or motions?
Question.
Councilor Rolfing.
How big does this make it so you can put in a box store and things there?
Yeah, it won't change the size of the potential stores or land uses. It'll just give more options for the variety of them.
Councilor Ensign Jr.
Mike, how is that intersection going to develop to the east there? Because you have the two roads going through in that area. Is it going to be as we develop that property? And
Yes,
then
we
we'll
have.
determine how that intersection is going to look?
We are working with the Department of Transportation on a corridor study of Highway 42 from just west of this intersection going all the way east to 6 Mile Road. And there's going to be some defined areas where the access points will be allowed.
Thank you.
Council, very good. Would anyone want to set a date of hearing and second reading for Tuesday, November 6th at 7 p.m. for item 24?
So move.
Second, Rolfing.
Councilor Anderson Jr. has made that motion, seconded by Councilor Rolfing. If there is no further discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Okay, council members Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Staggers?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Entenmann?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jamison?
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. Item 25.
25 is first reading, an ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, rezoning property at 3001 North Louise Avenue from the I-1 Light Industrial District to the C2 General Commercial District, petition number 2012-0906, and amending the official zoning map of the City of Sioux Falls. Planning Commission recommends approval.
This is a parcel that consists of about 7 acres in size. It's located what would be considered to be the intersection of Russell Street and Louise Avenue. It's currently vacant, and this is a proposal for a new come-and-go convenience store that will be developed on approximately 1/2 of this parcel. We're changing it to allow that future commercial use as well as other adjacent commercial development. And again, this is one that we've looked at and we're recommending approval of that change from industrial to commercial.
Councilor Karski.
Question for you, Mike. There's residential directly to the south of that. Any objections to any of this?
No, we did not hear any objections, and again, we used our public notification process with the letters. You know, we've taken calls about these developments, but there was no public opposition to this one.
And from the map, the way it looks, the station would sit with the back to the residential, so there probably wouldn't be a lot of lighting concerns, that
Right.
type of
The
thing.
canopy will be on the north side, and on the south side, there'll be a landscape buffer
Okay,
adjacent to the residential development.
Very good question.
Move to set the second reading.
Thank you very much. Councilor Entenmann is going to set that date of hearing and second reading for Tuesday, November 6th for this item. And is there a second?
Second, Rolfing.
Thank you, Councilor Rolfing. If there is no further discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Okay, council members Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Staggers?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Entenmann?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jamison?
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. Item 26.
All right. 26 is first reading, an ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, amending the revised ordinances of the city for a major amendment, petition number 2012-0912 to Chapter 1545070, Planned Development Districts at West 32nd Street and West Broke Drive, allowing changes in land use as reflected in the revised sub-area regulations, and amending the official zoning map of the City of Sioux Falls. Planning Commission recommends approval.
This parcel consists of approximately 7 acres of land. It's part of what's being developed as the Westwood Valley subdivision. And for those that are not familiar with the west side, what I've said is that if you can visualize on the Ellis Road and 41st Street, we have a YMCA. To the west and north of that is a major detention pond. And then to the west of that detention pond is kind of the general location of this particular item. The developers have been working with city staff for some time on amending the land use plan for this area. Some time ago, we started looking at what we've called a west side corridor, and that was going to be a major highway that would extend along the west side of this property that's now being considered tonight. For a variety of reasons, including primarily floodplain concerns along the Skunk Creek, where this potential west side corridor would cross, we've now looked at a different option and now moved that idea back onto the T. Ellis Road alignment. So in working with the developers of Westwood Valley, of looking at what would be the best option for this land use, originally it was going to be a commercial corner with the west side corridor on 32nd Street, and now we're looking at more of a higher density residential. So the amendment that we're being asked to look at would change it to allow multifamily residential. To the north and south and then to the east is all being developed as townhomes. And so that's what we would anticipate this area as well looking at in the future. So that's a long kind of explanation of what the intent is.
Thank you, Mike. Councilor Jameson.
Mike, none of the homes to the north there are developed, right? Those are all vacant lots?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, very good.
Councilor Anderson Jr.
Mike, to the north again, where are the access and exit points for that whole area?
Plan better. There will be 2 collector streets that will extend through that area.
Okay, on the north side there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Karski.
And then on the south side will be 32nd.
And on the west side, T. Ellis Road?
Yes, on the east side.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on the wrong side of the street. Thank you. When you say multifamily, we're talking apartment buildings?
Apartments are probably more like townhome apartments style. Mm-hmm.
Okay, okay.
Pretty much what you see around that area today is what they're looking at.
Thank you.
Council, very good questions. Would anybody want to set a date of hearing and second reading for Tuesday, November 6th at 7 p.m. for item 26?
So move, Entenmann.
Second, Jameson.
Thank you, Councilor Entenmann. Thank you, Councilor Jameson. That has been made and seconded. If we could have a roll call vote, please.
Council members Karski.
Yes.
Rolfing.
Yes.
Staggers.
Yes.
Aguilar.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Entenmann.
Yes.
Erpenbach.
Yes.
Jameson.
Yes.
Thank you. That has passed 8-0. Item 27.
This is first reading an ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, rezoning property at North Cliff Avenue and East First Street from the I-1 Light Industrial District, I-2 General Industrial District, and the RD Residential District to the RS2 Residential District, petition number 2012-0914, and amending the official zoning map of the City of Sioux Falls. Planning Commission recommends approval.
This property consists of about 30 acres of land. You are familiar with this because you've allowed the approval of a tax increment financing district for the proposed development that we're calling Whittier Heights. This will be 80 single-family residential lots extending east from Cliff Avenue. Currently, this property is under 3 different zoning districts, and this would be the first step in changing it to the single-family designation. We are being told by the developer, which is the Denham Company, that we would like to go ahead and set second reading for November 6th tonight, but there is a possibility that may get deferred. But for now, we would like to move ahead with this next step in getting the zoning changed for single-family residential development.
Michael, thank you. Council, would anybody want to set that date of hearing and second reading for Tuesday, November 6th at 7 p.m. for item 27?
So move, Anderson.
Second, Karski.
Thank you, Councilor Anderson Jr., and thank you, Councilor Karski. If there is no other discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Council members Karski.
Yes.
Rolfing.
Yes.
Staggers.
Yes.
Aguilar.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Entenmann.
Yes.
Erpenbach.
Yes.
Jameson.
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. Item 28.
28 is a resolution amending the 2012 to 2016 capital program.
This resolution or amendment to the capital program allows us to begin construction yet this year for the previous item we talked about. It's that Sioux River South Interceptor Phase 1B. And what moving this forward does for us and taking that updated project amount and that project and moving it into this year is allows us to do construction and disrupt the park and the soccer fields at a time when it has low usage. So what this project would entail is bidding it yet this year and awarding it this year. By moving the capital project forward into this year, we can award yet this year. We're hoping to get good bids because this would be a low construction activity period of time, and so we're expecting good bids. And this construction project is going to provide some challenges because there's a lot of rock for us to go through, and so that's going to take some time.
Thank you, Trent. Anyone in the audience want to speak to this item? Very good. Council, any comments? Councilor Rolfing, would you like to make a motion on this one?
Yes, move approval. Get it done.
Thank you, Councilor Rolfing.
Second, Karski.
And there's a second by Councilor Karski. I love it. If there is no further discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Council members Karski.
Yes.
Rolfing.
Yes.
Staggers.
Yes.
Aguilar.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Entenmann.
Yes.
Erpenbach.
Yes.
Jameson.
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. And Council, I apologize for the commentary. Item number 29.
29 is a resolution creating tax incremental district number 17 for the City of Sioux Falls. Planning Commission recommends approval.
Good evening, Brent O'Neill, Community Development Department. I'm here tonight to talk about our request to create tax incremental district number 17. It's a request we received from Dunham Companies formally not too long ago, but it's actually a project we've been discussing with them going back several months. I think it'll even take us back into the late part of 2011 if we really wanted to dig that deep. But basically today is the culmination of all that work and their work on bringing potential development to a part of Sioux Falls that really hasn't been developed or has been underdeveloped for some time. On the map here you have a picture showing what our proposed boundaries of tax increment district number 17 are. You'll see Grange Avenue on the west. Getting to the east is Minnesota, about 2 blocks away. It's about the equivalent of 42nd Street on the north, and then a few blocks north of the future proposed 49th Street corridor. It is the site of the former Williams Pipeline. They were there for several years. They've now been gone for several years. It has been underdeveloped and undeveloped since their absence. The site's 30 acres in size. Before we get into the details of the TIF district, I know we've brought a few before you in the last 2 years, but we take that for granted sometimes. So I just wanted to hit a couple very high-level points on TIF right from the beginning. The first is that there is an existing taxable value on the property, a property tax. That tax stays in place. That continues to get distributed to the county, the city, the school district, and there's a small water district that receives a small portion of that as well. On projects like this, when we have a value-added development, and in this case it's a very substantial value-added development, we can use that increment created and the increment taxes created to put that into certain eligible project costs, basically to make a project feasible that under other circumstances might not be feasible. We're limited under statutory rules to TIF being no more than 20 years. So when we do projections, that ends up being a kind of a very real cap. TIFs don't always go that 20 years, but that is the maximum limit we are working with. One final point, just a little bit about the process. We are required to go to the Planning Commission before we come to the City Council. That's a state law requirement, and that is something that we did at the very early part of October. So upon their recommendation, and they did recommend we approve that the City Council consider the boundary and the plan, and the boundary is what creates a district. So we're here tonight to ask for your approval on that. Diving a little deeper into what this site and this plan entails, like I said, the current taxable value is relatively low for an area in this part of town. Its value is really roughly $1 million for those 30 acres. It amounts in a minimal amount of property tax going to those 4 entities that do receive a tax from this property. Development in this area has the potential, probably on the low side, to increase the value of this property for taxation purposes to $30 million plus. Projecting it out on today's mill levy rates, that's $550,000 in projected new property taxes from this site. In looking at TIF in general, again, going back to those statutory guidelines a little bit, they throw out the maximum standards of what can be allowed in a TIF district. That includes a lot of the capital costs associated with the project, specifically environmental costs, things like land assembly, financing, et cetera, are all allowed. In theory, that could be, $8, $9, $10 million in eligible costs on this site. Given its location, given its distance from some of our core areas where we have traditionally used TIF, we wanted to look at this one much more cautiously. I think as we reevaluated it, we did feel that this project, because of the conditions of the soil, and I'll discuss that a little bit more, but because of the conditions of the site, it was going to be extremely tough, if not impossible, to develop without some sort of a tool like this being used. However, with the tool being used in this case, and like I said, we were going to be fairly conservative with that, we worked with the developer to limit the possible uses of TIF in this instance to environmental costs only. As is somewhat of a standard practice with the city does, in this case, does recommend putting in a very small line item to some corresponding infrastructure. We're really not anticipating putting that in. The developer is responsible for all infrastructure, but it's something that we do just as a matter of, like I said, practice, but in some ways I think good practice, just a way of preventing any unexpected burden or what have you falling on to the city's shoulders. We want to avoid that through a method like this, and so this is something that, for example, we did with the CNA project related to the Greenway, to give the city some potential opportunities to recover some costs through the TIF if that project gets developed within the proper time frame. This site, under the proposal we received, is slated for a mix of commercial and residential uses. You guys have seen this before, I believe once, if not multiple times, just through some of the rezonings and so forth that came forward ahead of the TIF request. The site, again, is difficult to develop primarily because of the environmental conditions. It was a former petroleum storage site. There has been some work done on the site, but it is not necessarily at the level that is necessary to support development of this type at the site. It does meet the city's objectives of removing some of this contaminated soil from our depository, as well as it promotes the goal of building in the core and out first, that infill development, and encouraging that growth of the city in those areas first. This commercial and retail development is going to invest, or have invested, $50 million plus in private investment. The developer is working on a project, as well as a retailer is working on a project there as well. Something very specific to this TIF, again, because there's a concern about making sure we're using it just for environmental costs only, and to ensure that TIF is being used properly in this case, we've worked with the developer on a bit of a cost share, where the TIF in this case will be able to pay 85% of environmental costs. We're still expecting the developers to be able to build the rest of that 15% into their pro forma for making the site work under their standard practices. Under that same scenario, we've also put a hard cap of $4.9 million on environmental. As I showed earlier, I think it was about 5.4 was kind of a maximum estimate of costs. With that 85% built in and some other reasons for the cap, we are going to put a hard cap of $4.9 million. If you recall, the $550,000 per year in annual property taxes, it's likely that this TIF could be paid for in 10, 11, 12 years, much faster than that traditional 20-year TIF that sometimes gets looked at. Some final considerations on this project. One, those environmental conditions are unique to this site and have made development hard. So incremental financing in this case will help offset some of those costs. Has been discussed with the developer, any of these costs have to be incurred by the developer, and they will only be paid for those costs to a reimbursable basis on the TIF. So that is going to take maybe up to those 10 years, but there's not going to be any city contribution directly up front. As you guys are well aware, the property is properly zoned through previous action. It does meet some of the standards that we have, including the 2035 comprehensive plan, and the plan has been drafted in compliance with state statute. With that, I just wanted to acknowledge that we do have a couple other staff here that can speak to this in addition to myself, as well as members of the developers team, and that concludes my portion.
Brent and David, thank you very much. Great job. Before we proceed to the council, is there anyone in the audience who wanted to speak to this item? Welcome.
Todd Meyer Henry, 315 South Phillips, Sioux Falls. I represent Dunham Company. And as I've said before on past TIFs, this is the second opportunity the public has to comment. First, notice is sent to all the taxing districts that the City Planning Commission is going to contemplate the creation of a tax increment district and approval of a plan. Then, simultaneously therewith, it's published notice of the Planning Commission meeting. The Planning Commission has a meeting and then considers whether to forward or recommend that on to the City Council, and then it's forwarded. And this is the second opportunity the public has and the governing body to consider this issue. Creating a tax increment district is discretionary within the governing body. They must consider the benefits and detriments of the creation of this district. And with that, I'm probably here to answer any specific questions. And if I can answer them, Don Dunham's here and he can assist me.
Thanks, Todd, and thank you, Mr. Dunham, as well. Team, before I go to the council, is there anybody else in the audience who wanted to speak to this item? Very good. Then I will leave it in the hands of the council. Councilor Jameson.
Todd, tell me how the apartments fall into the public benefit of the TIF.
Well, the public benefit that the apartments fall into is solely for their assessed valuation to accelerate the time frame the TIF lasts. As we see, this is a relatively short tax increment district time frame, 10 years to 11 years, or if the city wants to add their $1 million tail on the end, that may extend it a couple years. But what that does is that accelerates the revenue so we pay it off sooner, and that the tax revenues go to the taxing districts at a sooner time.
Will the apartments be considered affordable housing at all?
Market rate. And the apartments were also in there because the actual storm drainage pond is on that property.
Councilor Enneman.
One question, I'm not sure who would answer this. The TIF is for a maximum of $4.9 million. If the environmental work is, say, $1 million, that's what the TIF is going to be for?
Correct.
Correct? Yes. Great, thank you.
Councilor Karski.
I have a couple questions. In the past, most recently when we rezoned this property, the question was asked kind of in disbelief, is this property really cleaned up? Is it ready to be built on? And we were told that the state said it's safe to do this. Why is this TIF necessary now for environmental cleanup? Can you?
Well, when you get what the state regulatorily wise says it's clean, what that means is that it is not, it does not endanger the public safety, either the polluting of water or of air. That does not necessarily mean that there are not contaminants in the soil. It just means that those contaminants aren't leaking down or leaking or bubbling up. And at this stage, as long as you don't touch it or move it or dig it up, it meets the regulatory clean definition. However, to you and I,
close enough for government work. Okay, I understand.
Brent, did you have any comments on that one as well, or did Todd do a pretty good job? Thank you. Thank you. Councilor Karski.
I guess the other question, this might be for Mr. O'Neill. Do we have a timeline on a TIF? But you know, by that I mean when work has to be started or completed?
Yeah, there's a 5-year limit under statute that all work has to start within 5 years. You know, in this case, it'll all probably be within 6 to 8 months.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Anderson, Jr.
Brent?
Yes.
With this 4.9 to 5. Whatever million that we're talking about using for a TIF, what testing was done to come up with these numbers on that property?
Sure. There has been I might defer a little bit to the developers, but there's been a series of testing over years, and levels have fluctuated up and down, sometimes just by the way chemicals move in the ground, sometimes between wet and dry seasons, water tables change and can change the dilution. These figures in the TIF plan, and that's, by the way, a worst-case scenario of all the action that might be needed to get these things. So some testing will occur, day one, and there'll be a little bit of give and take as far as determining the level of mitigation required. But the testing has been a series of tests that have been done over many years in conjunction with the DENR to get a baseline of what the contamination levels are underground.
Mr. Meyer-Henry or Mr. Dunham, would you mind providing any insight on that question that Councilor Anderson Jr. had?
When the engineers started looking at it, they started getting real numbers on the costs associated with actually going in and developing this project. And so all of the numbers that are in the plan came directly from Costco or Dunham Company's engineers trying to get what they wanted was a not to exceed number, which they did not want to give. And so those numbers came directly from people that would bid on these projects to move ground, to put in liners, to make sure that any petroleum product does not either gaseous state or liquid state come up into buildings, et cetera.
Mr. Dunham?
Don Dunham, 330 South Phillips Avenue, 230 South Phillips, getting late, I guess, South Phillips Avenue. I'd just like to add a couple of things to what Todd said, and one of them is that originally we thought that we were going to get by for $2.5 million on the whole 30 acres after meeting with our engineers and all that. Well, by the time the Costco geotechnical engineer, civil engineer, architect, and designer, they came up with $4.4 million just for their site. And believe it or not, over half of the dollars being spent on our site for the apartments is actually going to Costco's benefit, because that's where the BMP is. And the BMP has to have a liner under it so that you can't get the gases emitting up through there, so people sitting out on their decks can't breathe. I mean, that's one of my biggest fears, of course. But anyway, I'm just sort of telling you what it is that we just have to be so careful. But we did get Costco down considerably working with our engineers. It was 1.175, I think, just for the liner in the BMP pond.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Anderson Jr., any further questions on that?
No, thank you.
Very good. Councilor Urbanbach.
Thank you. Question more either for Brent or for Darren Smith, who I know is in the audience as well. I'm looking at the project plan, page 6, for your reference. In between our meetings today, I met with a citizen who was very concerned that we're getting kind of willy-nilly with TIFs in Sioux Falls, that we're being way less conservative than we should be, that we are giving TIFs for all kinds of things that maybe aren't the smartest thing to give TIFs for. Would you address that, and would you talk about that chart that's on page 6 that looks at all of the TIFs that are active right now and how that compares to our taxable value in the community?
Sure. Thank you for bringing this up. This is something that we've discussed a little bit internally as well, and along discussions like this that come up as well. One example that we've come up with that we haven't really shared a lot that I like to share is in the last couple of years we've done 7 or 8 TIF districts in Sioux Falls, which some might say is high, and it's certainly higher than more recent standards. However, the example I like to use is we've had close to $2 billion in permitted value in the last.
B Or an M?
With a B. In the last 5 years. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
In the last 5 years, and to think that we've done that much development in Sioux Falls and we've only used 6 TIF districts, I mean, I think the give and take over that period is an extremely strong economy in Sioux Falls and a real limited use of TIF in Sioux Falls. The total taxable value in Sioux Falls is about $11 billion. Minnehaha and Lincoln County statute allows us to go as high as 10% of taxable value may be in a TIF. We are probably just north or just south of 1%. So it's still not even relatively low, but quite low, given some of those thresholds that we could look at.
If I might just comment then, Mr. Mayor, I think that's really important for us to understand as citizens that, yes, we are using this tool a little more than we have previously, but that we're using it wisely, that we're using it on projects that would not otherwise happen and that are going to make a huge difference in terms of retail development, in terms of sales tax development, in terms of the way that this community grows and prospers. And I think it's really important for us to look at that idea that these are very small pieces of the giant pie that is the Sioux Falls economy. And I just really appreciate you guys working on this the way that you did.
Thank you.
Councilor Buck, thank you. Councilor Heineman.
Yeah, and I think it's a point, too, is that I know we have a lot of discussions when it comes to development and what kind of incentives do we locally or statewide have to encourage development to come into our communities. And quite honestly, it's my understanding that this is probably one of the few tools that we have in our toolbox. And it has been this council's action and a very conservative approach that we don't want to burn this out. This stuff has got to make sense for our citizens, and we need to do it respectful of what their needs are. And I commend staff for the hard work that they put into this, and I look forward, going forward, to walking in the door of that Costco store.
Councilor Jameson.
Brent or Todd or whoever. One of the questions I have is when Dunham Properties or Dunham bought the property, did they know that there were restrictions on developing that property?
I don't know that we totally knew.
Mr. Dunham, if you'd just come forward, please. Thank you.
I don't know that we totally knew because we actually had a contract signed for a totally different use with one of the large medical facilities here in Sioux Falls. And so that was always our plan, and then to put apartments behind it. Well, when that medical facility backed out, you know, that was a 500,000 square foot dome. Yeah, and that would not have required the issues that we ran into with Costco.
So then what you're saying, I mean, do you know that, could you plant a tree on that property today without breaking the seal of the?
Well, I don't think it would bother a tree because I don't think they really care too much about the gas smell. But again, having said that, I think it's more about settlement. You know, I mean, you see all over when you've had something that they've taken out and they put in substandard fill. Well, that's essentially what the state did and Williams Pipeline did here. In other words, they didn't put in compacted fill. So we have to take 90% of that out.
When when I looked at a map, I thought I could still see the rings of the tanks. Did they just, when you say fill, what did they fill? Because the tanks were above ground, right?
Environmentally, when they closed their site, and it's obviously contaminated, they went in and did some test holes to see where the most contamination existed. And if it was at a level that dictated to take it out, then they were required to either take it to the city dump, if they could at that time, or at that time, I believe, they put it in a barrel and they shipped it to somewhere and they stored it. And so then they bring in fill and put it in, and they dig a lot of test holes, and they only clean up those areas that were over a certain limit. Other than that, they leave it as it is, and they are required for a number of years to have those test holes, and as water seeps in, they take water samples out, and they see if they can get it to meet a certain standard, which may not be clean for drinking water purposes or anything close to any of our wells, but that it's sufficient to say, here's a closing letter and it's closed. What that closing letter doesn't ever say, and there's a good paper by Zurich Insurance Companies, that it's never really closed. And if you look at DNR's website with regard to oil cleanup, it says if you ever go into it and open it back up and we find oil contamination, we start cleaning it up again. And so that's the state. So if I owned that property, I'd come in, take all the barrels away, try to get as much dirt on top of the soil that you can see is absolutely contaminated, take that out, and then pray that they dig these holes in the right spots so that I don't have any tests that are bad. And then I'll monitor it until it's good, and then if I'm lucky, someone will come along and buy it. If not, what I believe the industry's tried to do is we can hold this, or we'll put this land in a corporation that will go bankrupt and then someone else can take care of it. And so they lobbied the legislation not to what we would consider is clean, but what's considered for environmental purposes is at least it doesn't leak into the neighborhoods, it doesn't leak into our drinking water, and it doesn't bubble up into the air where we clean air, smell it, and contaminate ourselves. We just haven't had a lot of that in our state. I think we have, 2 locations in Sioux Falls that will have to consider that. I mean, the school that was knocked down, I think that's still in the same state.
Mr. Meyer, very good job. That was very good. Thank you. Councilor Jameson, continue.
Just to follow, how long have you or Don owned the land?
1 year. So I wanted to add this, Greg, or Commissioner Jameson. For 17 years, the state of South Dakota and the Williams Pipeline had 19 monitoring wells on this site for 17 years. They have to monitor it for a long time to make sure it's clean. And since we bought it a year ago, we've had 8 monitoring wells in key positions. And so we can then tell, if it's shooting up gas or if it's going down or up, and we're doing it mostly to maintain the level of the site as far as how deep's the water and where would you hit it at.
Councilor Jameson?
So those test results that you've been keeping track of, those are different and separate from what Costco did. Costco did their own, as I understand, right?
Yeah,
and they're making their own evaluation of.
Yeah, they did their estimates based on probably Seattle, Washington. That's their headquarters. And their engineers are mostly out of Chicago and Seattle. And so my guess is that they came up with that 4.4 million because that's the 2 million right now that we've sort of assigned for their cleanup based on their engineer, geotechnical engineer, architect, and all those people. And we're thinking the 2.5 for our apartments because about half of that goes to the liner for the BMP.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Well, tremendous discussion, very good. And Mr. Myhenry and Mr. Dunham, Brent, David, Darren, thanks so much. It adds a lot of really good detail. Well, Council, with that in mind, Councilor Jameson.
I'd make a motion to approve.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Councilor Rittenbach.
Question about it, and I think Brent is going to answer this. Do we need to read both of them together and pass them together, or we do them separately?
Yeah, I apologize for not saying that right away, but
Thank
there's
you.
2 separate actions required to formally approve this action tonight.
Okay, thank you.
And that's the resolution first, Brent?
Yeah, resolution 28 or 29 and then 30 to follow.
Very good. With that in mind, Councilor Jameson, would you like to continue on with that motion?
I move to approve both
Thank you.
items.
Second, Karski.
Councilor Jameson's made a motion to approve item 29. It was seconded by Councilor Karski. I'm so sorry?
He said both items. We can't do that. We have to.
Just one at a
Yes,
time.
and that's why I said 29.
Right.
And 20. So there's been a motion to approve item number 29, and it has been seconded. We've had great discussion. Councilor Jameson?
I just wanted to add a comment that previously was brought up about the willy-nilly use of these TIF districts, and I've certainly heard that concern as well. The other side, though, is the potential that a developer may get a cash cow deal, somehow that the developer gets a big check. And I think in this case, I would have to argue that the risk associated with this development preludes any of those potential options for a big check. And if he should make that money, then he deserves it because he took that risk beyond what any fair-minded person might. Sorry to say, but it is a tremendous risk, and this is part of the challenge of being a developer, is that going for it. And I commend him for doing that. I do understand that Costco is committed to this location, and I've done a little research and found that they are, and that's great for us. It's great for our city. It's great for the funding of our city. Anyway, I just wanted to state that on behalf of the developers that there is a tremendous amount of risk involved, and this is a clear example of that being done.
Councilor Anderson, Jr.
I'd like to follow that up also and say to the citizens of Sioux Falls, when we look at using TIF, we have been looking at it very seriously, and this is a part of our city. Yes, a company in the state, my feelings are, used the minimum requirements and walked away from a piece of property within our city. But it is a piece of property within our city. It is a piece of property that does need to be cleaned up and utilized. And by using TIF, this is definitely the quickest and easiest way to get it done. So I will be supporting this.
We have a roll call vote, please.
Council members Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Staggers?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Entenmann?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jameson?
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. Item 30
is a resolution approving the project plan for tax incremental district number 17, City of Sioux Falls.
Brent or Darren, any further discussion on this item?
No, unless there are questions.
Very good. I do have to ask the audience, any comments on this? Very good. Council?
Move for approval, Anderson.
Councilor Anderson, Jr., thank you.
Second, Entenmann.
There has been a motion made and it has been seconded. If there is no further discussion, you know what, I will just make one comment. It's not been stated when Costco, the proposed development, is expected to be up and running. Mr. Dunham, I know the citizens of Sioux Falls are chomping at the bit to find out that answer. Would you mind relaying that to the people before we vote on this?
Absolutely. Right now, the closing date is programmed for February 15th. They're providing us another $450,000 non-refundable money by November 16th, and they're closing by February 15th. So it's later than we wanted to, but then they want to get it site ready by May 1. And from the time they break ground on that site-ready site, then they have their grand opening within 110 days of when they actually start the project. Wow.
So that would be approximately, you're thinking August?
Yes, they want to be open for the fourth quarter, I know that.
So, okay, so people of Sioux Falls, if the council were to approve this item, there's the potential to have Costco at that site in the fourth quarter of 2013.
Right.
Thank you. And council, thank you for allowing me to ask that. You didn't allow me, I just did it, but thank you. Well, with that in mind, let's have a roll call vote, please.
Council members Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Staggers?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Entenmann?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jameson?
Yes.
Thank you, City Council. That has passed 8-0. Item 31.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement between the City of Sioux Falls and Washington Pavilion Management, Inc. for the management of the Washington Pavilion of Arts and Science.
Good evening, Darren Smith, Director of Community Development. If these microphones don't work after tonight, you can bill our department. Brent's been kind of hard on him today, going back to the afternoon, the informational. Well, again, good evening. The item in front of you is it is authorizing the mayor to sign a 19-page agreement that we have spent the better part of the last year plus negotiating with the Washington Pavilion Management Incorporated Group. And what I'd like to do tonight is hit some of the highlights of what those the goals were going into it, and then the key terms and changes with the agreement. So I'll start briefly here with the overview, some of the things we wanted to accomplish. And when I say we, the city, going into reviewing the previous agreement, which I should say, the agreement that you would be approving tonight will replace an agreement that has been in place for essentially the last 7 years. And so this will be a 5-year term with this, with the proposed agreement going forward. But what we wanted to accomplish is a few things. One is a full understanding of the facility operations, the finances, and past agreements associated with the pavilion. We wanted to have a full discussion about the risks and opportunities associated not only with the operation of the pavilion, but also the facilities as well. We wanted to broaden the scope of those that would be involved in this agreement negotiation and ultimately the approval. By that I mean in the beginning of the process, we had at the time Council Chair Aguilar and Council Vice Chair Urbanbach involved in some of those initial large group discussions. We had several members of our internal finance team involved, and I think it was very, very beneficial to the process. A few other things we wanted to accomplish. We really wanted to clarify ownership of the assets at the pavilion, both short-term and long-term. That, in my opinion, was very ambiguous in the previous agreement, so we wanted to clear that up going forward. We wanted to improve regular communication with the Pavilion Management Incorporated. We have a great relationship with them. The city has had a great relationship, but how can we make that even better and enhance the communication, particularly as it relates to the finances, the needs, the operations, and again, the facilities that are a public asset. And finally, we wanted to address naming rights issues. The Washington Pavilion Management Inc. group has been engaged in naming rights and sponsorship type transactions in previous years, and we wanted to get a full understanding of what that has meant and what it will mean going forward, and with the understanding communicated to them that the city is working on a new naming rights ordinance that almost certainly will apply to the pavilion and other public facilities. So the key terms and changes in this agreement compared to the most recent one or the existing one. Again, it is a 5-year agreement that's proposed. It would become effective per our city council approval process after the mayor signs it. So if the agreement is approved tonight, it would become effective in approximately 25 or 30 days, and it would run through December 31 of 2017. So just a shade over 5 years. Some of the key changes to touch on. Again, clarifying ownership of assets, and basically, long story short, what we made clear was if 1 penny of public funds or city dollars is contributed or goes towards purchasing or acquiring any kind of asset, FF&E, science center exhibits, those types of things, they will be and always remain city assets. Those things that are purchased wholly with private funds or pavilion funds will remain short-term and long-term pavilion, Washington Pavilion Management Inc. assets. Use of those assets off-site will now require city approval. I think this issue has been brought to some of your attention in previous years. It's been brought to our attention. A concern that as a Washington Pavilion Management Inc. group is out there trying to generate revenue and provide services off-site for events outside of the pavilion facility, that they may be competing unfairly with some private sector entities, and doing so using our assets when you're talking about perhaps staging or AV equipment or other types of FF&E. So we had a discussion about that, and what we agreed upon was that going forward, if there was a request or an opportunity for the management group to provide that service and generate revenue for what they do, that it would only be with our approval if it involves city assets. Again, city asset being anything that we put even a penny or a dollar into, they'll need our approval to do that. It's important not only because of the private sector competition issues, but also those assets are publicly funded. They're taxpayer funded. So if they're used more and more outside the pavilion, that without question will reduce the life expectancy of those assets, and we'd be replacing them sooner than we would normally have to. A couple financial things. We set a specific date, May 31 each year, that the Pavilion Management Group must submit their proposed budget for the coming fiscal year to us and what their request is for support with the operating contract. We will also, going forward in this agreement, require monthly financial reports. So on the last day of each month, we will receive a financial report with detailed financials for the operations over there, and we'll be able to look at that. Maintenance responsibility amount was raised to $2,500 for the management group. It was $1,000. So basically any repairs that need to be made in or to the building, previously up to $1,000 was the management group's responsibility. Anything over that was the city's. Now it'll be up to $2,500 will be the responsibility of the private management group. Anything over that will be the city's. The city finance director will have a permanent seat on the Pavilion Executive Finance Committee. So again, this is part of that enhancing our communication with the private group and the operations over there, the finances and so forth. And that, of course, would be Tracy Turback going forward, whoever's in his position, including on an interim basis. And lastly, the new naming rights ordinance will govern the pavilion. I touched on this earlier. This is not actually in the agreement because it wouldn't be appropriate to do that, and it would be redundant. There is a line or a section in the agreement that basically states the pavilion and the management group must comply with all federal, state, and local laws and ordinances, and we know that this very likely will be a new ordinance coming in the coming months, and we do have a verbal agreement with Larry Toll and the management group there that no such agreements will be entered into by them until an ordinance is in place. However, if there is a tremendous opportunity to do that, they will approach us immediately, make us aware of that, and we'll work together on that in partnership. So those are the key terms and changes associated with the new agreement. I would just say, I think you know this, but in the agreement there's almost no dollar amounts. Those, the operating contract, those things that people like to focus on, that's part of the annual budget process. It's not actually a part of the agreement. The agreement just states that they provide a budget to us annually and they have the ability to make a request, and then the city responds accordingly. And we're not obligated to provide funding at all. But I'd be happy to let Mr. Toll come up and speak on behalf of the management group.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, I'm Larry Toll with the Washington Pavilion. Just to echo some of what Darren has said, I think we clearly identify whose assets are whose, and so that if, for whatever reason, the contract would come to an end, we have clearly identified city assets and pavilion assets. The term is great. Having Tracy Turback on our Executive Finance Committee, he's been an active member anyway, and so to have it codified in the contract is a great asset, because that really improves that communication link. He sees our financials, not only sees our financials, but has an opportunity to understand what's behind those. Naming rights, as Darren said, we will not do anything without your approval, either formally if you had once you get an ordinance, or if there's something prior to that, you'll get a chance to see that. So other than that, we're pleased to have this behind us in a 5-year contract. I think it's a great compromise for both organizations, and it's a great example of a private-public partnership.
Larry, thank you. Folks, before I move to the council, I do want to open it up to anyone in the audience who would like to speak to this item. Very good. I'll move to the City Council. Councilor Staggers.
Yes. You know, I guess one big difference between this contract and the contract with SMG is that for 5 years, we do know how much we're going to be paying in management fees to SMG. But here with the Washington Pavilion, we do not know at all. I guess I'm a little concerned, if we can do this for SMG, why can't we do this with the Washington Pavilion?
Well, when you look at the Washington Pavilion, you look at the zoo would really be a better comparison to the facility in terms of the mission and purpose, and then you have the convention center and the arena, and then the new event center. And you know, we had those discussions internally. I suspect that maybe they've been had in the past as well, but I think when you look at those facilities, they're very different facilities in terms of the mission, the purpose, and how they've been structured. You have to remember that this was all put in place by a public vote back in the 1990s with the entertainment tax and the Washington Pavilion and the Sioux Falls Convention Center, the structure and the funding at that time. And so we've looked at that. It's something we'll continue to look at in the future, but I do believe that given the different missions and purposes, that it's appropriately structured now. The pavilion's mission and purpose is to promote the arts and culture, to educate with respect to arts and culture, and of course they're operated by a nonprofit with many individuals who are at the local level who are invested in terms of their time and financial resources and so forth. So they're just structured very different. They have, in my opinion, very different purposes and missions.
No, I agree. They have different missions and purposes. But money is money, and we know how much money we're giving to SMG. Now, for the next 5 years, I'm not quite sure how much money we're going to be giving to the Washington Pavilion. Can you clarify, though, how much is the subsidy going to be next year?
Well, the amount that you approved with the most recent budget for 2013 is $1,566,000 and change.
And is that up a couple $100,000 from the previous year?
It's up approximately $175,000 from the previous year. However, it's important to note that for the several years before that, they were flat, where there was no increase. There was a $20,000 increase from 2011 over 2010, which amounts to about 1%. And so it was flat for several years before that.
If I could just also mention, when I was on the council before, I remember when it went up to $1.3 million, and this is just going to be temporary. Well, it was never temporary. It continued on. And now we're at, well, over $1.5 million.
Yeah, and if I might just continue with that, those are the things that, again, this process took us longer than we thought it might on the front end, and I'm glad we did it right and not fast. We really did look at all those numbers and scrutinize. And I think it's important to note, and Larry can touch on this, that, and I think this is something that a lot of folks in the public don't understand, is the vast majority, if not all of the dollars that we provide for this operating contract annually really do go to maintaining the facility, supporting the facility, everything from the building to security, repair and maintenance, staff that are associated with taking care of the building.
If I could just say one more thing. Since we really don't know, at least the public and the council does not know how much money we're going to be subsidizing in the future, have you been already talking about how much of a subsidy will be in the next, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years?
Well, that's something that's difficult to know going out because, again, where this is different than some of those other facilities and management agreement structures that you're referencing, what we provide in financial support really does support the facilities and everything associated with the facilities and the grounds. And so that can change from one year to the next.
Mm-hmm. Councilor Aguilar.
Yes. In the past, Larry, you've given us, the council, a report as to how much our financial assistance brings into the economy of Sioux Falls. Could you remind us of what that number is?
We provide about $15 million to $18 million in direct financial benefit. I always say that's just the financial end of it. And as you look at major employers in this community, Avera or Sanford or Raven, other high-tech companies that are looking to recruit, we are usually the first spot that the candidate's spouse sees, and probably the second place that the candidate themselves see, because we tend to make Sioux Falls look a lot bigger because we bring a lot of things to the city that I think people coming from outside would not expect.
Thank you.
And I think if I could go to Councilor Stagger's question, There is a real trouble, and I think it's in this, I'd have to go back and look, there's a real troubling clause in there that says if the city can decide not to finance you in any subsequent year. And so it is an annual budgeting process, either through our budgeting with you and the city budget, and then OSEP and CIP. So you get to see it every year.
There's one consolation.
Councilor Urbanbach.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Stagger's questions confuse me, and so I just wanted to see if I'm thinking properly here. The voters in the 1990s told the city that we wanted to own the Washington Pavilion as a city. Because we own it, then we have the responsibility to maintain it. Now, we don't really pay a management fee to the Washington Pavilion. What we pay is a portion of your budget that then is used to maintain and operate the building that we own as a city. The difference then with SMG is that we not only pay them to operate and maintain our building, we also pay them, as Councilor Stagger said the other day, $200,000 in pure profit as their management fee. We don't have that going on with you, do we, at the pavilion?
No.
Tell us what do you use that money for?
Well, we spend last year we spent $450,000 roughly just on utilities. We spent $130,000 on building security. We maintain the building ourselves, where the city has your own employees to maintain the mechanical and electrical systems. We have those employees. We have the employees that also keep the house service people that clean it up, and no matter who's there, the next morning when you come in, it always looks the same. We provide all those services. The amount you paid us in operational budget last year was $114,000 a month, or $1.368 million a year. We spent about 1.28 of that just on those services. And then we gave the city back about $130,000 in the 2% city sales tax and the 1% entertainment tax.
I guess, Mr. Mayor, if I might, I'm just really grateful that we have this agency that is taking care of our building for us in such an efficient way. Thank you.
None of our money leaves town. It all gets reinvested in providing programming.
Councilor Anderson, Jr.
Question for Darren first. Darren, one of the points that you have on your key terms and changes is the use of assets off-site.
Yes.
What type of assets are we discussing here?
Yeah, I'm going to let Larry touch on that more specifically, but I would say it's a short list. Again, part of the discussion we wanted to know when this was brought to our attention, well, what are we talking about? How often does this happen? What type of events? Larry provided. I'll let him touch on it, but it is a short list.
We have sound equipment typically, light equipment that if we're not using them, there are other promoters that will ask, and we will lease them to them. Last year, I think it totaled about $12,000. So it's the equipment, the sound equipment has a certain life, and then it's going to be, we're going to have to replace it anyway. So this is just keeping it active.
Okay, so that's pretty much the short list then?
Yep.
As far as your promotions where you go out and send out some of your teams to do face painting and promote the pavilion, that is not included in this?
No, that's not. We're talking about actual equipment that the city has provided through OSEP to us, sound equipment that we would lease out to someone else. That our outreach, we got a state grant for $75,000 a year, and we are out in 12 schools now doing art after-school programs and science after-school programs in those 12 schools.
Okay. And then whether yourself or Darren can answer this, who in the city would approve these leases, I guess, is what they would be called?
Darren is our point of contact with the city. He would be my first point of asking for that kind of permission.
Since this is a product, if you're talking about staging, lighting, and things, is the revenue from those leasings being banked away to purchase new equipment when that equipment wears out?
No. All of our money from that goes into our normal operations, annual operations budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Jameson.
was just going to add that my wife is one of those realtors who brings by those doctors from those health organizations, and they do look at the pavilion and other places. So I would want to verify that that does occur, as well as the budget that we adopt in the 2013 budget or previous budgets. Larry, in fact, if we only allocated $1 million or whatever we allocated, that's what you would be capable of spending, and if the city only funded not enough to take care of their own property, it would be inappropriate first. But I think this is such a great deal that we should have more of you managing other buildings that we have. Right? In all
One is
fairness.
more than enough, Councilor.
But the budget amount that we allocate is just to cover the operating expenses of the building.
On a rough basis, you donate 1.4. We go out and raise 1.1 million in sponsorships, donations, grants, and we have about a $3 million endowment with the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation that generates about $100,000. Ticket revenue is probably is about 55% of our streams of revenues, and when you have a visual arts center that every show except for the blockbusters are free. There's not a huge revenue source there, and the blockbusters are such that all we're trying to do is make sure we cover the cost of those at least. Because the typical Norman Rockwell was about $60,000, Ansel Adams was just about $55,000, so it's an attempt to recover those, and that's the only shows we really charge admissions for. And the Science Center is it is a great asset for the community, but probably you wouldn't invest in it.
Councilor Stangers?
Yeah, just a quick question, Larry. The increase in the subsidy, is there any particular reason why we have such a dramatic increase?
We really have had such razor-thin margins over the course of the last few years. We're right now carrying a budget, an accumulated loss of about $273,000 on the books of the Washington Pavilion. Because when we have a loss, it goes on our books, obviously. The city doesn't step in and save us from ourselves. So we're trying to generate, just gone through a strategic planning process where we're trying to get our working capital to a level that is a little more conservative. Right now we're at a negative $500,000, and what we're really doing is using all the forward-looking revenues for ticket sales to fund that capital work that we do.
Very good. Councilor Stagers, did you have any other comments before we potentially get a motion and then vote?
I've always mentioned to the Washington Pavilion management, I want you to succeed, but I want, the pavilion just simply has to get out there and make money. And also, of course, we know that the real loss is coming from the Science Center.
I only drink on days that I'm trying to raise money for the pavilion, Councilor.
Very good. Would anybody want to make a motion on this particular item?
To approve Erpenbach.
Councilor Erpenbach's made that motion, seconded by Councilor Rolfing. Since there are no further discussion topics, if we can have a roll call vote, please.
Council members Karski.
Yes.
Rolfing.
Yes.
Staggers.
Yes.
Aguilar. Yes. Anderson.
Yes.
Entenmann.
Yes.
Erpenbach.
Yes.
Jameson.
Yes.
That is passed unanimously, 8-0. Council, any further business?
Move to adjourn Erpenbach.
Second Entenmann.
Been a motion to adjourn, second, and it has been seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much, City Council. Great job tonight. Make it a great night, Sioux Falls.